the best thing for any creator is to look at the world in a way that no one has ever looked at the world before. That is how you're going to stand out, and that is how you're actually going to succeed in a career and ultimately make as much profit out of this career as possible.
Welcome back to another episode. Today's guest is a friend of mine I met quite a few years ago, still while I was studying. And I've had the privilege to see him change, transform, and grow where he is today. This is a mouthful. He's an award-winning photographer, creative director, an advocate of gender equality and social justice, and, might I mention, an ex-professional athlete and international triathlete. He's done photography for big brands like Starbucks, the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team, BMW, Discovery, Triumph Motorcycles, and the list goes on. Brands, thank you for joining our show today.
Hi, Steph. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very proud of you for getting that mouthful out. I normally keep it quite short. When people ask who I am and what I do, I barely get a sentence beyond that. So thank you very much for taking the time to long-windedly introduce me. I really appreciate it. And it's so lovely to hear your voice again.
Yeah, it is, definitely. Welcome. So maybe you can start to just tell us a bit about your background. I know you're in photography now, but how did you get here? Well, what are you doing right now?
Well, what I'm doing right now is actually taking a little time out for myself, alas, because the last, 3.5 to 4 years have been undoubtedly an absolute whirlwind. I suppose that's kind of in the time when you and I paths crossed, and at that time you were well aware I was the furthest thing from a photographer, let alone a creative. I was studying sports science after racing motorcycles professionally, and at the time I was heavily into triathlon and was absolutely loving it so wholeheartedly, and was very passionate about the career that laid ahead of me in that sort of journey that I was going on. And multiple things happened. Obviously, a heartbreak was in the process of that, and along with an injury, which for the first time in my life I actually couldn't train, and I kind of was stripped of everything that I knew all at once, and I was immensely hurt and going through a lot of emotions and incredibly vulnerable, I think, at the time, and still to this day I don't know why, but I remember I was driving down to, I was living in Pretoria at the time, and I was driving down to Cape Town with my parents for Christmas. And on the way down there, I was bored in the car, and I think I was scrolling through Instagram, and I saw someone's post, and I was like, damn it, that guy's life looks really cool. He travels the world taking photographs. And within 5 seconds, I decided, you know what, I'm going to buy a camera and I'm going to take photographs. Just a really foolish idea. And I remember we soon as we got into Cape Town, I didn't even allow my parents to go to the hotel or anything. I just directed them straight into Orms. And when I walked into Orms, and I was checking how much money I had left in my bank account, and I was doing the math, and I very proudly walked up to the counter saying, okay, I have 3,500 rand to spend on a camera, thinking this was going to buy me the camera that all these professionals were using, that I was shooting everything that I was seeing. And I walked in there all confidently and got up to the counter, and I just remember seeing the look on the guy's face. Very sweet old man, and he just, his face kind of he just he just smiled at me and just walked straight to the corner, and he grabbed this what I didn't know at the time, but now know is called a box kit, and it's basically your entry level camera. So for 3,500 rand, I very happily walked out of Orms with my brand new, absolute entry level Nikon camera. with this little attachable lens, and I thought I was the coolest thing ever, and I was going to become this next great world traveler / Instagrammer. And so that holiday, I walked around Cape Town just snapping photos between the coffee shops, as you know, the hipster in me did at the time. And again, I didn't really think much of it, and I returned back to Pretoria, you know, very relentless on my pursuit of sports science. And about a month later, I got a call to go to Rwanda with the South African cycling team as assistant manager. And I remember it was a crazy time. That it was less than 48 hours that from the time in which we were going to leave that I got the phone call. And I thought, okay, cool. Yeah, of course. Why not?
Sure.
Great step in my career. I was very excited about it. And I'll never recall, I had packed my bags and I was literally walking out of the apartment. And as I got to my front door, I was like, let me throw my camera in. Grabbed my camera very last minute, threw it over my shoulder, flew to Rwanda. And as many of you know, cycling is quite a long and, you know, if you're not into it, quite a boring sport. And even though I was into it at the time, it was still quite boring once these guys started cycling. And, you know, they left on these sort of 6-hour races. And I was kind of left to wander around the streets of Rwanda waiting for them to return from the race. And in that time, I would just walk around and snap some shots and shots of the locals and fell in love with the Kigali market there. And so I kind of just was mucking about, killing time, thinking, cool, I was getting some cool snaps for my Instagram. And long story short, and we came back to South Africa, and with it being the whole 48-hour notice thing, a lot of it was, we'll just keep all your receipts and we'll refund you sort of thing. And so when I did and sent them an invoice, they said, oh, sorry, actually our sponsors didn't pay out like they promised they would. And I recall being 5,000 Rand now in debt on my credit card and going, oh crap, well, what do I do now? What have I got myself into? And so at the time, I was, again, as a sports scientist, I was very passionate about writing, and I had written a few articles before on sports science. And I decided, well, we had a really amazing experience. It was the South African cycling team was competing in the African Continental Champs, and it was a very unique experience. And so I thought, well, cool, let me write a story on it and try and sell it to a publication to make some of this money back. Started circling it around, didn't get much interest, and then eventually Men's Health showed an interest and decided they were going to buy the story. Wow. And then along with it, then they said, okay, cool, well, we love the story, but by any chance, do you have 1 or 2 photographs to go with it? So I sent them my album of, I think I only sent them like 10 to 15 photographs. And they said, okay, cool, great. Do you mind if we use the photographs? And I was like, at the time, I knew nothing. I was like, yeah, sure, cool, whatever. Thinking they're going to put like a little thumbnail photo, you know, next to it. And eventually, if you know print, it takes quite a long time from, you know, once it actually goes into print to landing on shelves. So I think it was about 3 months later. In that time, I was still working as a sports scientist, mucking about with my camera. And I remember it came out, and I was completely naive to the extent in which it was going to come out. And I actually got 10 full pages in Men's Health in their 20th birthday edition.
Jeez.
So all of my photographs have now been published as like full page spreads. And I was like, picking this up, I remember standing in the Woolworths flipping through it. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, I hope someone likes my story. Thinking, you know, this would get my foot in the door into the European market in cycling and as a sports scientist, completely oblivious to this whole photograph thing. Again, go back, continue my life as a sports scientist. At the time, I was working with a lot of athletes that were training for the Commonwealth Games. And so naturally, they have sponsors that need content. And as an athlete, they obviously need to be producing content for their sponsors. So I thought, well, make a little side hustle whilst these guys are training. I'm going to take some snaps of them training and they can sell it to their sponsors and that. So and that sort of picked up, and then I was progressing with that, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And next thing I knew, I was in a very much conundrum of 50% of my time was going towards photography and 50% of my time was going towards my sports science. Mm-hmm. And so I won't recall the moment I actually woke up one morning and I was working far too long and it wasn't sustainable. And I just sat down with myself and I said, I've got to make a decision. Am I going to pursue photography or am I going to continue with this whole sports science that I just got a degree in? And I decided, well, what the heck? Let me try this photography thing. I can always fall back on my sports science. And it's been a wild journey ever since. It's been 3 years to the day since I bought the camera. I actually bought the camera on my birthday, so it's quite a significant occasion for me. And yeah, I mean, last month.
Brands, When was your birthday?
Well, it's coming. It's still coming. But 3 years this year will be 3 years from purchasing a camera.
That's crazy.
And so every birthday, it's quite interesting. To me, it's more of like a
Wow.
personal celebration of this new journey that I've gone on. And so yeah, it's about to be 3 years since buying my first camera, and I've a month ago just had my first ever solo exhibition, which was a huge success. So to have that all happen within a span of three and a bit years has been such an absolute whirlwind. But the craziest journey, and Steph, as you know, I've transformed a lot myself too. I mean, that story goes even more in detail as to how I've personally transformed it since becoming a photographer. But in a nutshell, that's pretty much the overview of how I landed in this crazy position of walking around with a camera for a living.
That is amazing, man. That is an amazing story.
I wish people listening could see Alfie's facial reaction.
I'm just like, there's so many things about that I'm just like, yes.
Yeah, it's always an interesting story to share with people, and it still catches me to surprise to this day. And again, it's been such a beautiful sort of journey, and still to be quite young and experiencing it. It's been such a significant thing in my life of really just following your gut. I think that's the end lesson of it. Regardless of the career that's come out of it, I think that's the message that applies to almost everything that I've been able to take from and apply it into everything that I do in my life, and try to inspire people to do in their lives. It's because that's what it was. It was literally a gut calling saying, well, go get a camera. And I think naturally we as humans, and I know I'm speaking about myself particularly, we tend to kind of, you feel those things, and then you start thinking about it, and you go, oh yeah, that would be great, but financially I can't. Yeah, logic comes into play. It's that monkey brain sort of context. And so it was just such a great reminder and lesson to learn at such a great stage in my life at 25 to follow your gut and see where it takes you, and you really have nothing to lose. I mean, it's the beauty of life, and I don't have all the answers, but it was just such an important lesson, and a lesson I'm so grateful to have learned at such a vulnerable stage in my life.
So listening to your story, like, there were quite a few things that were pretty interesting there, but there's one specifically that I guess I'd like a bit of your opinion on, because one of the things that I noticed about your story is that, like, there were some opportunities that came about pretty much that, were less to do with your skill or experience to that point in photography, but were a little bit more about the fact that you had access to things that maybe other people might not, traveling with specific sports teams that were notorious, and sort of having the opportunity and seizing that opportunity. So can you maybe talk a little bit about how you sort of look at your network in relation to your photography career, and like the kind of experiences that you sort of go through?
Yeah, so I've always believed that, to me, networking is absolutely crucial, regardless of who you are and what you do. I'm very much a people's person, and I've always been obsessed with meeting new people, learning new people's stories and their backgrounds. And so I've always found myself of sort of putting myself out there in terms of, which was actually perhaps one of the key points for this photography career that took place. Was I was sitting in Starbucks in Pretoria, and I was sitting there working, editing some photos, and this guy next to me turned to me and he just opened up a conversation and just said, why are you working in Starbucks? Why did you choose this coffee shop of all coffee shops to work from? And my answer was as simple as, I think the same reason we all do is because there's good Wi-Fi. And I don't have Wi-Fi in my apartment at that time, and so I spent my days buying the cheapest coffee I could and working from Starbucks. And anyway, long story short, it turned out that this guy was actually the head of marketing for Starbucks Africa. And in that moment when I realized that, I turned to him and said to him, well, nice to finally meet you, because I actually been wanting to chat to you guys because your Instagram absolutely sucks. And he turned to me and he goes, well, I'm glad someone else thinks so, because this is an argument that I've been having. And he said, I'll tell you what, we have our annual board meeting in a week. Why don't you put a proposal together for me? And if I like it, I'll take it to the board. And if the board approve, you can help us generate new content for our Instagram. So I said, okay, cool, great. Because one of the things that I picked up on was
Wow.
that there was zero inclusivity to the South African market. So they were, at the time, they were using just all international content that was being sent to them. So there was very little reflection of the South African community in that. It was off season as well. So all their, their Christmas stuff was all the white, snowflakey and all of that. So I saw that as an immense opportunity. And then it's, again, something I've always been very passionate about within South Africa specifically is brands being more inclusive to, genders, race, and so forth. And it's just opening themselves up to the variety of communities, because we are such a diverse country. And you so often see, particularly when we see brands, such as Starbucks, that come into the country from a global perspective, and they're new to the country, and they don't necessarily have the resources, and they don't put their hands on the ground in our country. They just drop the content. Zara would be another example. H&M, they're producing the content externally in Europe or the States, and they're sending it here thinking that it's going to connect with our consumers, and it definitely doesn't. So anyway, long story short, I'm getting a bit sidetracked here, but it led to that opportunity of me actually getting the job with Starbucks and landing them as a client, which were my very first client, which then got me on this whole journey, which then ironically Starbucks actually led me into fashion. Sure. Because at that point in time, I then had to, I was absolutely naive to what had to be done to a photo shoot. I was like, cool, well, they need photographs of their drinks. Then you start thinking, well, if there's people need to be drinking their drinks, so now I need to go and find models. Now I need to dress the models. Now I need to dress the table that they sit at. I need to, bring in artificial lighting to light the beverages up nicely, and the props and all of that sort of stuff. And I started to go down that route, and that's how I actually fell in love with fashion, was through the exploration of that and having to compose these interesting images. But to answer your story, it's really just putting yourself in a position that you open-minded to new opportunities. I think there's a lot of people, and I definitely think a lot of creators, I think, sit back and wait for opportunities to come and find them. And the reality is there's far too many creators in this country than what we can handle. And, and clients are comfortable. Why would they want to go and hire someone new if they've been working with the same person for the last 5 years and it works? They're hitting their profit goals. They're generating, they're moving forward as a brand in their eyes. We could sit here and say, oh, but it's useless, it's pathetic, but in reality, they're happy. They know the rates that they're going to charge, and they can plan the next season. They can sit here saying, okay, well, at our 2022 winter Christmas campaign is going to cost us 80,000 Rand to produce, because that's what it cost us this year. We'll just use the same people again. So it is very hard to almost get in there and then snatch that job away from someone else, because that's unfortunately the reality, as harsh as it may sound. Again, so it really boils down to how you put yourself out there, and again, it's I would say it leans on perhaps being a bit more extroverted than introverted, and today's days make it even harder to do so, because it takes that face-to-face interaction. And I'm very conscious of, that's my trade old trick, is actually sitting in coffee shops and working from coffee shops, because people can see what you're doing. They see your screen and they go, oh, you're a photographer. And they come up to you and they start talking to you, and that's how you get that. And so I've kind of pinpointed the people that, the coffee shops around now, being Cape Town, that is the type of demographic that I would like to produce work for. You kind of get an eye for the type of person that will go to that. That's what forms that community. And you go, okay, cool, I'm going to sit within that place Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays, and I know the foot traffic coming in and out. I overhear conversations, and I'm quite, again, I enjoy, and I have no problem going up to people and saying, oh, I overheard that you are a fashion designer. I'm a fashion photographer. Tell me about your brand. I would, this is what I do. And is there a match? And sometimes there isn't, but, it's really just putting yourself out there. And I understand, that opportunity is a very hard thing to come by. And I have been immensely privileged in my upbringing, in my access to education. But that being said, the best thing about creativity is your uniqueness. And in that process, if you have access to an abundance of education, you're going to start looking like your teacher. And that means that that's already been done. There's no uniqueness in that. So if you are sitting there and let's say you want to be a photographer, and this is actually a project that I'm working on, and which we hope we can get rolling in the next year or so, is to going to underprivileged communities and help educate them on photography and give them cameras to start documenting their lives, and to educate them on how they can utilize art as an income generator, and how to upskill themselves and to make a little bit of side money, but also to have a creative outlet, to perhaps use that as an outlet to deal with the pain and suffering that they might be dealing with in their situations. And so we've really examined this and gone, well, what it takes is an eye. It's a unique experience. It's a unique angle on an everyday situation. So, we're looking at, for instance, a reference area would be the Cape Flats. And we were saying, cool, what happens if we go into the Cape Flats we can get 50 film cameras sponsored, and we go through and we educate them on how to use these cameras, and we leave them for a week and we give them an assignment and we say, okay, cool, document 2 things that bring you joy, 2 things that bring you sadness, 2 things that perhaps give you a sense of optimism. And then we come back a week later, we help them, we develop the photographs, we teach them how to develop it so they can go through that process. And we work with them and we help them pull the selects, and then eventually it will land in it being an exhibition. And what that allows for is again, that you don't need an abundance of resources to have a unique eye. The best thing for any creative is to look at the world in a way that no one has ever looked at the world before. That is how you're going to stand out, and that is how you're actually going to succeed in a career and ultimately make as much profit out of this career as possible. And it's very easy me sitting here and preaching that, because I think it's a journey that we forever going on, and we always impacted and influenced, by social media trends, and particularly myself being a fashion photographer. Those sort of things are such in your face topics that you have to rely on in your career and be connected with. But it really is that essence of finding who am I, how do I see the world that's different, and how do I focus in on that. So in answering your question is yes, opportunity is it's relevant. I was fortunate to be in a great space when these opportunities arose, to have a sense of a financial backing behind myself that I built up through my sports science career, to allow for me to purchase a camera. But in the end of it all, and this is something that I really am passionate about, bridging that gap between, because my lesson out of it is that I wasn't educated in it. I never, and I insisted that I never watched, for instance, a YouTube tutorial on it, because I didn't want someone else to tell me what to do. I wanted to figure it out my own way. The technicalities of taking a photo are actually quite simple to grasp over some time. It just takes practice.
Sure.
The one thing no one can ever teach you is an eye. And I never want that to be diluted. And I don't think anyone should ever have their eye diluted, because we are all unique. And that is the most special thing to this planet. And if you're going to utilize your creativity in a unique way, that is how you can give back. That's how you can inspire people. So that's in hindsight, I hope that does answer that question, but that's my view on that topic.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Very brave.
And I think one thing that you mentioned, because, I spoke about the opportunity and access side of things, but something that you said that I think sometimes maybe doesn't get spoken about enough is the fact that you also need to be willing to roll the dice. Like, opportunity isn't going to slap you in the face.
Yeah.
It's going to come in the form of just a random guy sitting next to you in Starbucks, or, innocent, like a request to sort of join this team and decide to bring your camera. So like, you almost need to have your eyes open and be willing to kind of go pot committed on the opportunity when it comes by.
I couldn't agree more. I think it is that. It's, and that's just fortunately the way I view the world, and I couldn't recommend it enough to anyone. I think, it's beautiful to be adaptable. It's beautiful to be willing to learn, because who knows what comes out of that. To be multidimensional, and it's a very hard thing to do, and I understand that. And again, I'm not trying to stand on a pedestal and say I'm the master of it. I'm by all means probably very far from that, but those opportunities did arise, yes, because I was adaptable and I was curious. I think curiosity led it beyond everything. The willingness and curiosity to learn.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Brand, I remember when you entered the photography space, especially in Cape Town, there's a very particular culture. with the international market and the fashion that is within Cape Town. What was your, how did you feel and what was your experience when you entered that space in Cape Town, and how do you view that photography culture now?
So I was very nervous in the move to Cape Town. I did keep kicking the ball on it. I was incredibly intimidated by the creative community in Cape Town for a long time. And I made a plan to move to Cape Town. Actually, at the last minute, I chickened out and decided, I'd rather move to Joburg. So I moved from Pretoria to Joburg, thinking that would be enough. And I lasted barely a year in Joburg before I did eventually move to Cape Town. And what it actually took was going down for a shoot, and that I wasn't making any money on, because I was basically going to break even on it, but it was to shoot a runway show for Men's Health. Not what I did at the time, but I just saw it as an opportunity to get my foot in the door within the Cape Town community, and I took it. So I think they only paid me, I think they paid me the same price my flights cost, let alone my accommodation for the stay. But again, I wanted to, I really was passionate, and I was very driven to get there. That was my goal, to make it in Cape Town. And so I took the job, and I stayed at a friend's house, and I went and shot. And this is a beautiful thing. I was meant to stay there for 3 days, ended up staying there for 3 weeks. And in that time, it allowed me to decide I'm ready to move to Cape Town. I wasn't being allowed to leave, for instance. It was a job came here, and a lead to this, and a meeting with that person. And again, it literally just took that of hopping on a plane and going to an event to shoot something that I didn't shoot. I don't shoot runway. It's a very particular style of photography, but I kind of weighed it up, and I went with it, and amazing things came out of it. And it is, to answer your question, Steph, it is a very international market in regards of the production side of things, and it generates an immense amount of revenue for South Africa, which was perhaps why it was so devastating when our borders were closed over the last couple of months, because it is a huge revenue generator for the city, let alone the country. And basically, Cape Town is just one big, beautiful movie set. It's a location. It's got the most amazing light. It's got incredible talent. It's got amazing shoot locations. But so I felt that, coming down, I thought that, cool, if I make it big in South Africa, I'll then start shooting these jobs for these international brands. And I've kind of recently, over the last sort of year, because that was my goal, have unfortunately learned that that's not actually the case. Because, again, going back to what I just said, Cape Town is a location. And what a lot of these brands are doing now is they will rather fly their team out. So they'll bring all their A-list talent to South Africa, and almost then hire the B-list talent. So from your assistance level down would then get hired in to come onto the set. And it's a bit of a sad lesson to learn, because I mean, that's the reality, and it shut down a bit of dreams for me. But it's why I'm now taking this next step, and I'm going to be moving to the UK for that very reason, is because it is ultimately, from a photographer's world, it's a location, and it's an incredible place to build your name, to build your experience, to build your knowledge on photography, but also to have access to so many different beautiful things. For instance, locations, there's an abundance of models that are trying to make it here. So you can always strike amazing deals with modeling agencies. The local designers are also incredible and so beautifully understanding and open to new and exciting things. Again, that's the beauty about going smaller. South Africa's small and our industry is small, but small allows adaptability and allows people to play. So it's given me an incredible opportunity to, when I work with brands, for them to have a lot of trust in me as a photographer to creative direct the shoot for them, as opposed to them coming to me saying, we're hiring you to photograph this specific thing and don't dare think anything else or point the camera in any other direction, sort of thing. And that has allowed me to learn so much. It's allowed me to push the boundaries, to get uncomfortable in so many ways. And it's just such a beautiful, it's almost like a university in its own right. You come here, you learn the trade, and there's people that are doing very well and making a beautiful living here. For me, for instance, I want to achieve more and bigger things in my lifetime, and work towards photographing for high fashion brands, and that is why I then does need to take the next step. But in summary, it is such a beautiful location, and there's such incredible opportunity, and the people are so warm and kind and open to collaboration, and that's probably been one word to summarize it all, is the beauty of collaboration, of people coming on board and saying, yes, let's work together to create something amazing. And that's really what's helped me grow so much in the last 2 years.
Is the industry, from a photographer point of view, not the models, is the industry still very male dominated?
My heart says yes. Unfortunately, I would agree on that. There are some incredible female photographers doing incredible work. I don't feel that it's limited. And it's actually an interesting that you brought this up, because I had this very same conversation at with a couple of people who worked in the financial services industry, and they obviously, BE is a big topic for them, and they were asking me that very question: is are you limited by your race and your gender in this country as a photographer? And the answer is actually it's no, and I say that with a sense of guilt in my voice, because that's the truth. It's never been a hurdle for me. It's never been a prerequisite that a brand has to work with a certain race or gender photographer, to my knowledge. And so there have been no barriers to my career in that regard. There is definitely, from other angles, I would definitely say that it exists. But I think, from a brand perspective, when they personally just looking for best value for money and highest quality in which they can generate. And that relationship is what drives the brand's decision as to whom they work with.
Okay.
I think that's very interesting that you say it's not limiting, but it's also something that's so important to you, because if you look at your portfolio is incredibly inclusive. So that's almost like either the brands you work with or a very intentional choice that you're making.
It's come from both angles. So the South African brands are very aware of the importance of inclusivity. Often can I get very personal? I suppose this is what this is all about. So I'm going to talk very openly and honestly here. So there's a sense of inclusivity happening because it has to happen, which is what's frustrating. Is that if you walk around and if you go to, so I challenge this, the next time you go into a shopping mall, go look at all the posters of it within all the storefronts, the banners and images. They will all be very clearly and identifiably multiracial to a point and purpose. Yet it is not relatable to those various communities.
Yeah.
So it's almost a ticking of the box versus an authentic, inclusive campaign. And that's something that I'm struggling with as sitting on the other side as a photographer, because I don't have final say as to whom the talent is. I have a contribution, but it's not my choice. And the brands are always saying we need the emails are we need one black, one white. That's it, and that's great. But to me, that is not solving the inclusivity issues. That's rather making it incredibly obvious that we are still struggling with these issues. So my opinion is, look at the product, look at the brand. Whom is your demographic? That should be driving your decisions. It shouldn't be a conscious decision of we have to have a black, a white, and a colored female in this photo, and we're going to have them all stand together in an environment that the three of them, if you identify those cultures individually, would never be in that environment. They would never be friends, the reality of South Africa. They wouldn't be doing the things that now this brand is forcing them to do, looking all happy and cheersing an alcohol brand and at sunset and on this like beautiful beach, because that we know as a reality, South Africa, that doesn't happen. And it's not a good nor a bad thing. It's just a reality. And I don't believe brands are being sensitive enough and open-minded enough to those topics. And if I had my way, that's how it would be. A cast, it can be, because now this is my next thing. When last did you see an all-black cast of models? You don't ever see that. when last did you see an all-white cast, or when last did you see an all multiracial cast? You don't see that. It's this very definitive black white person standing next to each other, and that is where I think we're going so incredibly wrong.
Almost awkward.
It's incredibly awkward. So that's why I said I challenge you to walk through, because now that if you go over with conscious mindset, you actually look and go, oh, wait a minute. So how I would prefer to be doing it is I'm a very narrative driven person. So I would look at it and say, well, what's the narrative of this? Where are we? What is the location? Who would be in this location? What would they be doing? Okay, are they going to be driving a car? What type of car would this person who belongs to this community be driving? What represents them? And what uplifts that community as best as possible? And it's very, then, because to do that, then now you need to look at the history of that community. You need to understand the history of that community, of where it's come from and where it's going. And those are the sort of things that the understanding that need to be taken into consideration, as opposed to this very shallow ticking the box mentality. It's we need to be exploring and teaching ourselves, because I, as a white male, perhaps maybe know the story of, if I was photographing a white male, I would know, okay, cool, this is sort of the general history and the trajectory of a white male. I then need to go and educate myself in all these various other races and cultures, because that's my duty now as a photographer, to tell their story. It's my responsibility to understand their history and to put them in a position that stands true to where they are in current society. And that is what should be happening, because that would ultimately challenge me. If a brand came to me and said, Brandon, we're shooting an all black cast, we're doing it in this area, come up with a concept for me. That would challenge me, because that would then force me to go and do my research and to understand things a lot better. And if brands were doing that, there we would then have a complete inclusive community. Whereas now I think we're trying to throw a blanket over a problem.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. And I think what you're saying definitely makes a lot of sense. But let me maybe play a little bit of devil's advocate here, because I can sympathize with these corporates, because the social narrative has gotten to the point where when a brand makes a misstep, they get crucified. Like, they get absolutely destroyed by the culture. And so they will do absolutely anything to make sure that all their bases are covered, and like nobody has got any excuse to complain. So they make sure that they put every single possible color that could possibly affect them in every single shot. And it ends up essentially being, it's safe, but then it sort of loses the value of actually putting together a creative piece. So
safe.
Let's say hypothetically you've got a boardroom of marketing managers who are like, okay, this is our problem. Like, what should we actually do about this? Because we've got these people who are almost holding a gun to our head to make sure that we've got all of these different types of people in each shot.
Agreed. And that is where you're completely right. And I'm, again, very understanding that. And I've, being on the other side, which I've sat at that table as a creative director, working with brands, not photographing the campaigns in which we're conceptualizing and discussing. And those are the exact words that come out of people's mouths. And you're sitting now across the table with multiple, sort of a diverse table with multiple people representing multiple communities. And those are the exact questions that get thrown. And it is a much easier and safer option to go and do that. And I think that's what's happening. But I think where I'm sitting is I am a thought provoker. That's my nature. I've got a little bit of a rebel in me, and I like to push the envelope. And what I'm saying is I'm challenging people, and including myself, is that, okay, cool, we've done the surface level. We understand that we do need to have an inclusive, but I think it's time now we go a step deeper and we really explore this and have these conversations. And this is the conversations brands should be having. And yes, it's uncharted and dangerous territory for, say, as a brand, and it's not going to suit a lot of brands, and I understand that. But this, to me, is the conversation that fashion should be having and fashion should be leading with. It is an art form, and that's art's responsibility, is to engage in these conversations. And yes, you might put a toe out of line here and a toe out of line there until you find out what works, because we are in completely unprecedented times in that regard. And we're seeing all these movements from around the world that are happening, and it's so incredible that they are. And it's a very intimidating space for a brand to be in. But my challenge is, well, let's take this a step deeper. We've done our diversity. Now we understand we need to show various communities within each of our campaigns. Now let's take it a bit deeper and let's talk to those communities. Let's make it where when a community member sees a photograph of themselves or of a friend or of someone from their community on a billboard, they say, yes, that is absolutely authentic. That resonates with me. However it is that you do it. Is it a bracelet that they're wearing? Is it the setting that they're in? There's so many ways to do it. And I'm not sitting here saying I have the answers. What I'm saying is these are the conversations that we as creatives should be having.
Yeah. So there's something that you mentioned there, which I almost want to just repeat because I think it was extremely important, specifically about it almost being the fashion brands and the sort of creative brands, their responsibility to enter the uncharted territory. The way I kind of like to think about it is creative brands and creatives in general are essentially the pioneers which the more established and safe brands eventually follow on to. Because, there was a time where a photo with a black person and a white person in the same thing was uncharted territory. There was a time where that was the brand being very risk taking and really putting themselves out there. And eventually all of the big brands now are doing the same thing. And so maybe I like what you said about the fact that the creative brands almost have got that responsibility to push the envelope even further and establish the new ground.
That's exactly it. That's exactly my belief on it all. That's the responsibility I carry as a photographer. And I feel that's a responsibility that anyone that's wanting to put artwork out there does carry. Particularly that if you want to be a recognized, thought-provoking creative. And you can look at it in a very simplistic way, and you can say, well, we could look at the famous artists and say, the Picasso, for instance, when he painted a painting and the world turned to him and said, oh, that's absolutely pathetic. What are you doing? But what he was doing, he was just commenting on the space that the world was in at the time. And he was such a thought leader and pioneer in his thinking that at that very moment it didn't make sense. But we all know the outcome of it. He knew what was happening around him, and he was just reproducing a painting that reflected that. And obviously, since then the world's developed quite a bit, and I think our artistic streams have diversified in so many ways, and the way in which we have those conversations and reflect these through our artworks has diversified a lot. But ultimately it is every creator's responsibility to do that. That is the sort of what we carry with us on this path. And I believe very, very firmly in that. And again, it's just why I personally am so fascinated with fashion, is because ultimately that's fashion's responsibility, is to be addressing these issues. Because what fashion does is it's aligned with our musicians, it's aligned with our artists, our sculptors, our poets. What we're doing is we're just commenting on society, we're provoking thought, and we're leading the way forward. So if, for instance, if a brand such as Gucci, in which Side Note has done incredibly well on diversifying themselves as a brand and commenting on society and taking grasp of the next generation of millennials and Gen Zs, what they're doing is they're reflecting what we're all asking for and making it normal and comfortable for brands to therefore to think this way, to photograph people of different genders, of different races. And that really started, if we look back into the 90s, is when it actually started to happen. There was one of the most iconic issues of Vogue ever published was an all-black edition of Vogue. I believe it was in about 92, 93, which was published by Vogue Italy. And if you look at that, at the time, in the process, when the creative director was sitting there saying, or editor-in-chief sitting there saying, this is what we're doing, everyone around her was saying, you can't do that. You literally can't. Who are we going to sell it to? Who are our consumers? No one's going to buy this. No one can relate to it. And what she did is then created an entire crew of everyone who contributed to that edition was black. from the models to the hairstylists to the makeup artists to the photographers. Obviously, Naomi Campbell at the time was a very influential figure as a supermodel, and she really led this through. And I think was an amazing opportunity to have such a well-known face to drive this change as a supermodel at the time. But to that day, that edition is still so relevant, which because it made it okay for Black people to be included in fashion, which before was a very white-dominated industry. And from that edition onwards, we started to see inclusivity happen. And that's the sort of stuff that we need to be doing. It's brave and it's ballsy and it's so uncomfortable. It really is.
Yeah.
And you're going to get so much backlash in the process. But that is how change happens. Change is never, ever comfortable, ever. It shouldn't be. And I believe that is our responsibility and what we should be doing with our artworks and what I challenge myself on a daily basis.
Yeah. Franz, you mentioned, that as art, we comment on society with our medium. And then you just also said we have to be brave and bold. And I want to speak a little bit about your recent exhibition because I feel that's exactly what you did. It was a comment on society. It was being extremely courageous and brave. And maybe first to just start for, the people listening, they don't necessarily know what you shot in that campaign. Can you describe the type of photos, your process, and then what unraveled from there?
Yeah.
What you did?
I think now that you know a little bit more about me, it will make a bit more sense in explaining this story. But I've always carried with me the belief of my responsibility as a photographer is to speak about issues that are going on around us. And equally, my underlying drive in all that I do is redefining masculinity in a way of a postmodern gentleman as to what his mannerisms are. And I wanted to combine those two because I was incredibly sick and tired of what was going on in the world, or South Africa, I should say, with gender-based violence. It's at the moment when I was starting this process, it felt like I couldn't open Instagram or a news media channel without reading or seeing something about gender-based violence, and yet I felt nothing was being done about it. I had gone to the marches, I had done all that I could as a man in a very female-driven battle, yet I very predominantly believed and continue to believe that the issue lies with us as men. Therefore, I decided to then create a series of photographs photographed by a male with the intention of addressing the issues that us as men are carrying out about gender-based violence. And I wanted it to be an uncomfortable image, yet equally inspiring. Because what had happened is up until the moment of what I believe of this photograph, no one had ever taken the initiative to define gender-based violence. And when you start seeing the word everywhere you look on, it's always in the news, it's always on social media, I think we start becoming a bit numb to what that word actually means. And I thought, well, you know what, people aren't taking action now because we stand up with a sign that says end gender-based violence now, and I don't feel it's striking hard enough. We've done that. We've been trying that for years and years and years, and it hasn't changed anything. So I wanted to then create a series of photographs that defined gender-based violence, that by looking at it, you would know, and someone can go, oh, I am actually an abuser. I perhaps wasn't aware of it. I knew maybe I wasn't treating my partner very well, but now I have a clear reference as to what I'm doing is wrong, and to spark that guilt within someone and inspire them to change within themselves. Yet equally, on the other side, there are so many women whom are being abused, whom aren't aware that they are subjects of gender-based violence. They think that it's just that's what love is, that's what a relationship is, or it's a bad patch in our relationship. Some people find comfort in it, and I wanted to create a series of photographs that touched everyone in all communities and allowed them to feel a sense of defining what gender-based violence is, but also to, most importantly, inspire change amongst men. So what I then did is I then looked into gender-based violence, and it is obviously a very predominantly male on female issue. But what I wanted to explore was the other communities perhaps that weren't being represented in this struggle, because gender-based violence affects all communities. And so therefore I went into discussion and understanding of the LGBTQ plus communities, and equally created a series of photographs that spoke about gender-based violence on each of those communities. It was always from a male's gaze, as that was the world that I knew. I can speak on behalf of men because I am a man. And I wanted to create a series of photos that then did that. So therefore what we did is we conducted a photo shoot, or what I arranged was a photo shoot that was a high fashion photo shoot, because again, fashion is my world. It's the way I see the world. And going back to what I said earlier is I very firmly and passionately believe that fashion has the responsibility to change the world. And I'll take that to the grave with me, because it is an art form and that's art's responsibility. So therefore, I wanted to use fashion to allure people into these photographs with couture, high fashion imagery that was very contrasting with the violence that we're dealing with on a daily basis in South Africa. So there's a series of photographs that represent the LGBTQ plus community within gender-based violence. The campaign is called End Gender-Based Violence Now. We had such an incredible exhibition. It was about an 8-month process from the date of photographing this to it going into print and being exhibited. Just because I truly wanted to understand every aspect of this campaign, because it is a very, very sensitive topic, and I didn't want to enter anything where I, perhaps was misled or had an opinion on something that perhaps wasn't factually correct. So I really spent a lot of time working with gender-based violence organizations in discussions with people from each of these various communities to develop a campaign that I personally believe to be very striking and controversial, because I wanted to spark that emotion in people to call for change. It's a call to action ultimately. And we had such an amazing crew of people. I managed to get together quite literally the best creators within the fashion industry of South Africa, from designers to hairstylists to makeup artists to the talents, the models. It was such an incredible experience to see all these people come together, volunteer their skills and services for this. No one made a single cent out of it. Actually, people only spent their own money on making it happen, myself included. And I worked with a gender-based violence NPO, and I sat with her a lot and understood her story as a person, as well as the work in which they were doing. And what we then partnered with them to do was to launch an initiative that went into schools and educated school children on gender-based violence. And, as a woman, how do you know if you're in a toxic relationship? What are the signs that you're perhaps in a relationship with someone who's treating you incorrectly? And how should you be treated correctly? And on the other side of the spectrum, also working with the young boys and saying, okay, how do you treat your partner correctly? And what sort of traits should be instilled in you as a gentleman going into the world? And so I just felt so passionate about that cause. So everything we did was generating profits towards supporting the work that this NPO is doing in schools around South Africa. We also then worked with a bar in Cape Town to develop a drink that didn't exist on their menu, but the bartenders knew what it was, and it was promoted in the females' bathroom cubicles, that if a woman ordered this drink on a date, it would basically call into the bartender as a cry for help, a silent cry for help, to then get removed from the date situation that she's in. And then so they would help assist them get home or to a safe environment at no cost at all. So we launched the exhibition in partnership with those two initiatives as well. And it was just so great and incredible to see the community come together, to have support from gender-based violence NPOs and NGOs, everyone kind of getting together and just being like, this is exactly, topical. It's provoking. I had so many incredible conversations with previously abused victims. It just was such an incredible experience. Obviously, a very hard and challenging thing to go through. It was incredibly emotional. It was very intense, absolutely. But again, that just kind of all goes back onto my belief of this is my responsibility as a photographer in the world, as to how I need to be fighting social issues with the talent that I so fortunately have found and have access to with my resources. So those are the sort of projects that, I believe brands should be jumping on, but equally, I don't expect brands to jump on it. I'm again aware of the sensitivity around subjects like this, but to me, this is where art should be in the world. And it's very easy for a photographer to take pretty photos of pretty people on pretty locations, and you can get thousands of likes on your Instagram, and you can be celebrated as a hero. But what is that doing to change the world? What is that doing to make us better and progress as a human race, and that's where I go back to that question and challenge myself on a daily basis as to how am I contributing to this world, how am I going to leave this world, and what's the legacy I'm going to leave behind, what change did I instill or inspire people to think. And so that gender-based violence was the start to me of that. It was really a huge challenge for me. It was my first ever exhibition, and it's just been so great to see it come to life and to come to breathe and to live in a world and to tell the story and to connect with so many people.
Just, that is amazing.
Sure. Yeah. And I was looking at the photos now on the website, and the photos, the technique, it's just so beautifully done. And yeah, you definitely are such a natural storyteller. It is so vivid and present in your photography. Sure.
Yeah.
So that actually came to me as a dream, as a little side note. I'm a very vivid dreamer. It's to the detriment of my sleep health and sleep patterns, but it's like clockwork. I get hit with these very intense dreams at 2 a.m. and this was one specific one that, after a series of events that through gender-based violence just felt like was getting closer and closer to my circle. Starting out from hearing it on the news to then a friend of a friend to then it actually happening to friends of mine to me sitting there going, well, how can I help this battle? And to actually a situation where an apartment adjacent to mine, I witnessed it happening, and I stood there frantically trying to figure out how I could help this woman and trying to phone the gender-based violence hotline and running across to the security guards to try and get them to go up into this apartment and learning those stories of the absolute frustration of the state in which we are in. It felt very natural for me to then speak out using a camera. That's how I express myself. It's how I tell stories, and it's how I connect to people. And that's ultimately what this project was to me.
That's amazing. Sure. And I have to say, the technique, sorry, I just wanted to say, like, the technique is really amazing, but also one of the things that I really like about it is your use of almost like the whole shot as part of the narrative. There's one photo I'm looking at specifically with the blonde guy sitting with his finger in front of the lady, and then there's another man looking away, and it almost tells a story of like a blind eye being turned. And I would recommend for anyone listening, just hop over to the website. What is the URL for that where people can visit?
It's www.ndgbnow.co.za. So that is all the information on the campaign. Obviously, as I said earlier, any sales. The reason we're selling these prints is to generate money for the charity work in which we're doing through this within the school. So every single cent that comes into this campaign or this project goes directly towards that charity. So it's ndgbnow.co.za.
That's amazing. If you're listening, definitely at least go and give it a look.
Amazing.
And buy a print or two if you can. Sorry, Steph, I interrupted you a little bit there.
I remember, Brand, you mentioned, you experienced a little bit of backlash from the campaign, as one would, being brave and bold and tackling a topic that is very sensitive. You kind of have to expect some backlash. What has your experience been?
I was very aware of doing such a controversial topic, and particularly sitting in a space as a male, and even more so as a white male, to do a campaign like this is very controversial and can very easily be seen as not my space to have this conversation. So yes, I did experience backlash for those very reasons. I think the most common thing that I was called out on was being a white male, and that was a strong issue that people had with this campaign. But and as sad as it is to see that, I can also understand and connect with that, and I've wanted to learn through this process as well, because with any negativity, there is something you can always take away from it, regardless. And so again, I'm aware of situation. I am a white male. I can't change that. That's how I was born. That's how I will die. I don't believe that is an excuse to sit back, because I could very easily sit back and say, well, I'm a white male. How can I relate to this topic? It's, let me not point my camera at this issue, but I'm actually just going to go back to the beach and take pretty photos of girls in swimsuits rolling around on the beach. I don't want to be seen doing that. That is not in my DNA as a human. I feel a great sense of responsibility, regardless of my gender or my race, to speak up about issues that I believe in. And I would rather speak up and receive controversy or negative reviews than to sit back and keep quiet and not do anything at all, because change is only ever going to happen by speaking out. And I'm very passionate about seeing this serious issue in our country, an issue worldwide, but predominantly where we're seeing a far greater statistic in our country. I'm not going to let that pass by. I'm not going to turn a blind eye on the other men that are doing it, because it is our responsibility. It is my responsibility as a man to turn to the man next to me and call him out on his nonsense, and to tell him to stop acting these ways, to how to treat a woman. And I'll always stand for that. And yes, negativity has been very, very hard to receive. You know, as an artist, you're so vulnerable when you put yourself out there. And it was such an emotional experience from you know, before the exhibition to the night of the exhibition to after the exhibition. And you know, it takes a lot of bravery. And I think I was quite naive to the extent of bravery it took and how vulnerable I was being. Because I had so much, you know, adrenaline rushing through me in the whole process, and just focusing on like making sure prints are ready in time, and then hanging the prints, and then making sure, you know, you've got drinks, all these things, and then the exhibition happens, and you stop and you go, oh wow, I didn't realize I just laid my heart on the table for everyone to come and look and then poke at it. And it's been a very, I've needed a break from things afterwards for that very reason. And I've been locked out of my Instagram account because of this campaign, because people felt that. Because people felt that, again, being a white male, it wasn't my place to do this. So my account was reported and has since been blocked. So those are the things that come with this. And you know, we can look at it and say that there are serious issues within our culture, and perhaps this cancel culture that is formulated now, where people want to become hypersensitive. But in the same breath, I don't want to be seen as being naive or arrogant to people's concerns or opinions, because I want to learn with this. I want to, you know, when I do my next campaign, which I will be doing, that I am more aware of every single person's, you know, opinions, their thoughts, and my position as to how I can be perceived. Because I think a lot of it is a matter of perception. People see white male, therefore link it from A to B, but they don't know whom I am. They haven't taken the time to read about what this project is doing, the process that it went through, the various communities that it supports, the NPOs and NGOs which are backing it, which have contributed to the campaign. So people don't necessarily see and understand that stuff. And understanding, you know, we're scrolling through Instagram and you see a beautiful picture of a cute little puppy, and then the next photo you see, you know, a model laying with blood stains on the garment, and I can understand how that can be very provoking and triggering, perhaps. But in the same breath, I refuse to not showcase things in which I believe in, and not produce the work in which I believe in, and regardless of what comes out of that.
Yeah, I think we're probably kind of heading to the wrap up of this, but I think I have to first, I think, and foremost, say congratulations. I think it's very important as a creative to be able to see something that speaks to you, knowing that it's a risk, and still take that step forward. I think that takes courage. But I think what's even more important is, even after you do receive the criticism from that, to still be able to keep your head up and to keep moving forward. I think that's super important, because, you know, as a creative, sometimes you're going to get it wrong, and sometimes the criticism is going to be well-founded. But that's not a reason to stop moving forward, because, you know, as we were speaking earlier about sort of the creative's responsibility to be that pioneer, part of being a pioneer is going to the wrong place, making the mistake, and kind of needing to reorient yourself. And so I think I'm completely with you. Your race and your gender has nothing to do with the movements that are important to you. And when something speaks to you, you have a duty to yourself to do something about it. And so I think it's really amazing what you're doing. But I think what's even more amazing is that you're not letting the reaction stop you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And
I really
think
appreciate
maybe
that.
in closing. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, these things come. Negativity comes with progression. It's natural, and I always look back to the '60s as my greatest inspiration for everything that I do, and in particular that of the rock and roll culture and how it evolutionized. And they were banned off of the airways. They literally weren't allowed. The Rolling Stones and the Beatles were not allowed to be heard. They were literally burning their records in the streets, and they got exiled from the countries in which they lived in. But look at what came out of it. Every single person in the world today knows the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And that was because they continued to believe in the work in which they were doing. And that was by being a voice of the next generation. And with that, the people at the top, the older people, may not be able to relate to it, or perhaps in some situations, the younger people may not be able to relate to it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It's a process of finding your audience and speaking to your audience as openly and as passionately as you possibly can. I would never be able to stand on with a microphone. No one would ever be able to stand with a microphone and speak to every person in the world and have them all understand him. That's never going to happen. We can't please every single person in the universe. And I understand that. That's just because we're never going to understand every person in the universe, as great as that would be. But that should never shelter or hinder anyone from speaking up and believing or executing the things in which they believe so passionately. And as long as it's educated, as long as it's well thought through, and it's good intentions at heart.
No, I definitely agree with you. And I see we're kind of reaching the wrap up. So maybe to close, like a little bit of a lighter question, or I guess more a one looking to the future. Right now, and I hope you've got an answer for this. Do you have a shot that you are chasing, or do you have an ideal thing that you're looking to capture at the moment, be it a person, alive or dead, a phenomenon, a specific location? What are you aiming at?
So the dream photograph would be perhaps a hired by Gucci. There's no hiding that, or Saint Laurent. I won't be picky. And if I could have a few minutes with Mick Jagger, the '60s Mick Jagger, the good looking version before the overdosing and all those horrible dirty habits, where perhaps maybe somewhere in Paris. But what I would like to be doing, and to maybe answer this more authentically, is to be doing campaigns like this gender-based violence one, in which I spoke about, and addressing social issues. And the next topic for me, and which something I'm incredibly passionate about, is what fashion is doing to the world, as to the rate and state in which it's going. So it ultimately to be doing a campaign which speaks out about that somewhere in Europe, with the backing that would allow for it to be seen and marketed globally, that people can react to. So that's it would be maintaining the vision and mission that I currently have, but just doing it from a platform that has more reach.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. Thank you so much for this. Sure, this has been an amazing discussion, Brandon. And maybe before we wrap up, do you maybe just want to let people know where they can find you on social or website or
absolutely
something like that?
You can obviously find me on Instagram once it gets unblocked, which it will, because I'm incredibly optimistic about that. But BrandonHinton.jpg is my Instagram name. I do have a shiny new account that is lacking in the archive, beautiful back history of my life, but it is still there and shining very bright. But equally, you can find me on my website, brandonhinton.com, on all social media platforms. Brandon Hinton, you'll be able to find me. I'll be there, and very, very, very happy to engage and answer any questions that anyone might have. after listening to this podcast, or any inspired creators out there, people curious about photography. I just really genuinely, as my journey of it was very sort of blind into this industry and how fruitful it's grown to be. I really want to ensure that everyone feels welcomed into it, because it is a really beautiful space. And as we said earlier, being a creative it's very vulnerable and intimidating space to enter. But I do sincerely believe that, if anyone wants to enter it, there will be people there to welcome you with very wide and warm and fuzzy arms. And if anyone feels like having that conversation with me, by all means, please reach out to me. I would love to talk anything photography, creativity, or life related.
Amazing. Well, I guess we will call it there. Thank you again, Brandon, very much for your time and for your contribution to the public narrative. And I hope you have a great day further.
Thank you so much. I'll chat to you all soon.
Thank you so much, Brand.
Cheers.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, guys. Cheers.